before I bring him up here to speak. And let's see, we are on page. So the title of his talk today is The Meaning and Purpose of Life from a Buddhist Perspective. His quotes are, if you truly loved yourself, you could never hurt another. And that's by Buddha. Nothing can harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. And that's also by Buddha. And peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. That's also from Buddha. And there's one from Ernest Holmes, trust in your own self more than in all else. And his affirmation is, everyone has the potential to become enlightened. And now I want to take my time and read about Michael before I bring him up here. So Michael was born in London in 1966 to a Greek father and a Belgian mother. Since the age of 7, he was raised in the Kopan monastery in Nepal and became ordained as a Buddhist monk in the Tibetan tradition. At age 13, he entered the Sarajay Monastic University in South India, where he spent the next 18 years studying Buddhist philosophy. In 96, his mentor and teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, advised him to serve as translator for Tibetan Buddhist masters, and had since been invited to several Buddhist centers around the world. In autumn of 2020, Michael was invited to be the resident teacher at Yeshe Nobu Buddhist Center in Stockholm, Sweden, where he now resides. He's currently visiting his mother in Yucca Valley and has graciously accepted to give a talk at YVCSL. Michael, we'd love to welcome you to our Oh yes, also, I was going to mention this at the end, but just as a reminder, we will all be in the social hall after, and so will Michael, for any questions that you might have. All right, well done, Michael.
So, I think it's allowed to take this off while we're speaking, so that'll be much more comfortable. Okay, thank you. So, indeed, I'm honored to be here. It's a very, very meaningful, purposeful place. Now, of course, before I begin my talk, I'd like to just mention a disclaimer, and that is that although there was a nice introduction introducing me, and I do appear to you as a Buddhist monk with my robes on, as you might immediately identify with, on a personal level, it is in no way indicating any sense of sacred holiness or a holy person, anything like that in regards to myself. And I want to say that with all sincerity, because beyond these clothes, I'm a very ordinary human being, actually so ordinary with all of my own struggles and problems and recent emotional crises, that I was so close, this close to calling the organizers, Karen, to cancel the talk. It was really, honestly, I was like this close. Then I thought about it, and I kind of like, when you cool down after your emotions, you just cool down. I thought, well, of course, I'll be disappointing the organizers who have put so much time and energy into this, and all of you who have come here, of course, not just to hear me, with all the other wonderful presenters and the music, wonderful. Thank you so much for the music, by the way, it was really meaningful. But, I was also part of the key part, so it will be disappointing for the organizers. Well, my mom put a lot of effort in it too, personally inviting people. So it will be a disappointment, but ultimately disappointing to myself that I would have failed myself to share whatever I may have been able to share. So I just summoned my courage and I thought, okay, I will come up and, keep my promise and try to present. But as mentioned earlier, the title of the talk is the meaning and purpose of life from Buddhist perspective. However, the reasons why I almost canceled the talk was because I didn't feel adequate. I didn't feel that talking about such grand topics of Buddhism, which is about love and compassion as mentioned earlier, and about so many good qualities, on a personal level, I know I don't embody those qualities. And the fear really was being a hypocrite. I felt like coming up and represent, and wearing these robes, by the way, is a big responsibility. You might all identify with like Dalai Lama and other great teachers from our tradition. So, in fact, when I come here to Yucca Valley to visit my mom and other places when I'm going about by myself, doing my own personal wanderings, I usually go in normal clothes. And many of you here might have seen me or met me before in just normal plain clothes. And that's how I feel more common and comfortable. But of course, I do wear these robes on occasions like this to represent my tradition. And although I'm not a good practicing monk, I am still a monk on sort of like the verge, but I am still a monk. So to respect that, I choose to wear these robes. But I feel so inadequate to really, present and personify and to represent the real teachings when I don't really embody them myself. So instead of canceling the talk, I thought, okay, I'll try to be spontaneous. I'll come prepared to speak on the topic, which was a chosen topic, but I could either just present the topic and from the Buddhist perspective and the Buddhist teachings and philosophy around it, or I could relate it to my own personal struggles and make it personal so that you hear something which, of course, reflects the Buddhist teachings and how I have tried to integrate it, tried to understand it, and tried to make sense of my own life so far. So I leave it up to you. Since I thought, well, if I just talk about myself, that'll be, people haven't come here to hear about me, my personal struggles, they're here to hear about the Buddhist teachings. So it'll be unfair for you who are here in the audience, if I just start to ramble off of my own personal struggles, and that's not what you're here to hear. You have your own problems in life and struggles in life too. But nevertheless, since I would combine it with a bit of my own understanding of the teachings, I thought, well, either way, I guess I can't choose. I don't know what is best for people to hear. I'll leave it up to the audience. I'll leave it up to you. So here, since we're in a democratic country, I'm going to leave it to you. As I can't see the people on Zoom. I know that many are on Zoom, but those who are present here, if you could help me to make the decision of what my talk, where it would lead to, if you would really choose to just stick to the technical Buddhist teaching side in relation to the title, then actually please raise your hands and I'll just then make my best to do that.
We want some of it.
Okay.
So, most of it.
Well, we saw 3 or 4 hands. I'll now have to ask it that whether if you want to hear my talk as a way in relation to my own personal struggles and difficulty. Okay. So I think there's no way out of it now. So, and of course, it's not going to be easy for me, perhaps not for you too. It might trigger things in yourself. But I've committed myself to be vulnerable, to talk about my own struggles and difficulties, and how I've managed to somehow, so far, keep it going for myself. But to be true to the title of the talk, yesterday I was actually down at the Joshua Tree Art Galleries with my mother's dear neighbor and friend, Piper. And, oh, by the way, of course, many of you I haven't met, but some of you I've met a few times. And although I'm not a local physically living here, I feel like I'm a local by default. Because my mother has, of course, many of you do know my mom, and she's been here for many years. But on a spiritual level, I feel that we are all connected. We are all a big family, a spiritual family. So from that part, I feel like I'm not just a local, but I'm actually part of all of us together as a spiritual being. So now, going back to the visit to the art gallery last night, I was just, going around to help Piper to go there. We were looking at art, and then someone from the audience, a gentleman who was there, Piper was kind of introducing me to the people that she knew, and saying that there's going to be this talk this morning. And so, and this gentleman sort of like said, "Oh, what's the talk going to be about? What's it going to be about?" And I had to say what the title, the chosen title, the purpose, the meaning and purpose of life. And then he said, "Oh, well, what is it then? What is the meaning and purpose of life?" So I had to half jokingly say, "Well, I don't want to give it all away." Now, and of course I wasn't prepared to spend a long time. Piper knew that I wanted to get back home soon. So I was half jokingly saying that, you'll have to come to the talk or at least see it on Zoom. But it was appropriate that I was asked this question right there in the art gallery. And another appropriate reason why I felt that I'll be using a quote here is that I was presented a painting of my own late dad by Warren just shortly, and it was painted. We're not sure exactly. I didn't check the date, but maybe before I was born even, and it was painted here in California. So, with those arts that have come, and we all know that there are art lovers here. Raghavela has many artists, painters, and other kind of artists. So I came across this saying from a great artist and painter, which many of you would immediately identify with, Picasso. Yeah, Pablo Picasso. Who doesn't know about Picasso, right? So apparently Picasso had said at some time, this is his saying that I came across, is that the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of your life is to give it away. And to rephrase Picasso in the Buddhist context, then it would be the meaning of life is to find happiness within, and the purpose of life is to bring that happiness to others, to share that happiness with others. So actually, if you had chosen the first option of just talking about Buddhism, then I've done. Actually, my job would have been finished. But now I'm stuck relating that to my own personal life. So it is very grand, and who would disagree with that? The meaning of life is to find happiness within, to be happy, basically. And the purpose, if one is happy, one doesn't want to be too selfish. Why not share it with others? So really, that does actually fit in the whole Buddhist teachings, can actually fit into these two main categories. Finding happiness within, in Buddhism, to be a little bit technical here, we have two main traditions, what we can refer to as the Theravadan tradition and the Mahayana tradition, or as the Dalai Lama likes to call it, the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition. So the main emphasis in the Pali tradition is to really work on finding happiness within, to really meditate and work on finding happiness within. And that is based on morality, on the basis of, in order to find happiness within, the very first step is to refrain from hurting others, intentionally hurting others. Yeah? So that is the moral principle of how to find happiness within. Now the second step, how to share it with others, is in a tradition which I belong to, what is called the Sanskrit or the Mahayana tradition, which is where your very purpose of following a spiritual path and trying to do practice meditation is so that you can actually help others, specifically go out of your way to help others when you are equipped to help others, not only just few human beings, but the goal is extensive, all sentient beings. We include that in our prayer, that may be benefit of all beings. And for that purpose, then aiming towards what we call enlightenment. So then, but however, it is not like as one or the other. It's not as if you just work on yourself first and then you help others. It's actually a process where you intertwine. As you help others, you're helping yourself as well. So that is really the core of how the practice works. Now, since I've now coming back to my personal struggles, if it would have been decided that, you had requested to talk about myself, and I would be, as I'm now being vulnerable to talk about my own struggles, I would have titled the talk, Confessions of a depressed monk. That would have been my title, Confessions of a Depressed Monk. And I'm not saying this lightly, it's very true. I have been suffering from depression about nearly now 6 years. And there's been suggestions that I might have other conditions too, like bipolar. Someone sent me something about what is called borderline personal disorder. And I read about it. I've done a lot of research on those, by the way, but I have not had any clinical assessment about that. When I read about it, I can see there's tendencies of bipolar or personal, what is called, borderline personal disorder. I do have tendencies of that, but clinically I've been diagnosed with mild to moderate depression and of all the symptoms. So when I went to the doctor, this is when I was back living in Australia, he went through a series of questions and ticked off things. And then at one point he said, "Do you cry a lot?" And my immediate natural response is, "I cry inside. I'm crying a lot inside." And maybe it's a man thing, men, we're not meant to show our emotions and like that. But of course, it was not just a crying. It was a crying, it was the uncomfortable feelings within myself. And so I might as well share that, this, although it manifested only, like I said, like about 5 or 6 years ago, I can see within myself that the tendency was way down there, even throughout my childhood as I was growing up. It's usually with, confusions about life and you're not really sure what direction you're going that brings up anxiety, fears, and questions and so forth. So I would say that my first feeling in my early 20s was identity crisis. So the first identity crisis that I went through and had been going through was whether I'm a Westerner or an Easterner. As you might have heard from, of course, my brief bio, I was raised up in an Eastern tradition, Eastern culture since I was 5, 6 years old, basically. So all my life I grew up in an Eastern culture, but nevertheless, as my mother would remind me again and again, you are Western, you're born Western, nothing can change that. And that is also as a reality. I'm Western too, which means not just having pale skin and, and Western parents, but actually the Western psyche, the Western mentality. And I could say that when it comes down to the cultural differences, it's not just the superficial differences of different languages, different food, but there's actually psychic differences as well. So I've been struggling a lot like that. When you're raised up to behave and to act in a certain way from a certain cultural point of view, but then you have sort of these genes which otherwise make you act and speak and do things in another way, there's going to be a conflict. So I was struggling with that. But then as I started to really look into myself and try to understand myself better and be more honest with myself, I realized that identity crisis was just on the surface. The real identity crisis I was going through, as I discovered, was between spirituality and materialism. I was brought up and raised up in a Buddhist monastery, as you have been, as has been introduced earlier. So naturally, I would have heard a lot of these teachings, and seen value in it, and I do see value in the spiritual world, whether it's Buddhism or any tradition. But nevertheless, I still have very strong tendencies of being attracted to the material world and material pleasures, what we call worldly pleasures. So how do I coincide with that? How do I, and that was like a battle. And I don't know, this might be something that you might also resonate with as well, but it became quite deep and quite a struggle. Now, of course, the easy way to try to, shed light to managing this would be, find the balance between the two. We're human beings after all, so we're not like these super, beings or holy beings, and speaking about myself. So as a human being, accept the human frailties and temptations and all of that, but also we can still appreciate the spiritual world and learn from it. So yes, okay, to find the balance. And actually when I moved to Australia, or was asked to be in Australia, it was a very comfortable life. For the first time, I felt like I was getting best from the both worlds. I was still in a Buddhist institute, working with a Buddhist master, so he was keeping me in my line. But I also had the freedom to go out and work in the community as an actual interpreter for the Tibetan refugees there. So that meant I got some extra income. I was able to buy a car. Suddenly, I was having a very comfortable life. Materialistically, all the things that I thought I was missing out on, having a car, having my own freedom, having money, all of those were now available for me. So for a number of years, about 3, 4, 5 years, I worked in that way, and I really felt like, yes, this is the perfect balance. But of course, the underlying sort of unease has always been there. It was always there under the surface again. So now, of course, when I mentioned even earlier that you opted for me to share about my struggles and my difficulties and crises, in one word in Buddhism, that would be called suffering. Now, suffering is a word which doesn't really do justice for the actual real word that is presented in the Buddhist teachings. From the Pali, it's dukkha. And dukkha has that connotation, a very broad connotation, which includes the dissatisfactions we have in life, all the struggles that actually, because the word suffering resonates mostly in the English language, seems to resonate more where like people are actually in pain. When we talk about suffering, usually there's an image of people who are in a third world country, who don't have enough to eat, who are struggling for their survival, and that's the image we get. And we think like, oh, I'm not suffering, everything's fine with me, unless something hits you, like depression, of course. So, but the word dukkha, which is loosely translated in English as suffering, although it doesn't give the justice to it, is really the dissatisfaction. So, again, here, if we present it in this way, you might resonate with it. Dissatisfaction with pain, of course, who would deny that? No one willingly wants to have pain, but dissatisfaction even with pleasures. And this is basically my experience with depression was suddenly nothing was making me happy. I, as I said earlier, had been attracted to the worldly pleasures, which, by the way, in the worldly material world, happiness is all gauged by how much you have, how much you own. And that is how the culture, even in the East, there's no, people in the East, they usually think like, oh, of course the Western world has it much better because they have much more money, they've got all the accessories and all of that, so they must be much more happier. So, but the reality of suffering here was that the dissatisfaction. When you start to feel dissatisfaction, even with the pleasures that you normally have, then you suddenly feel like there's no hope for me anymore. I can't. But what really triggered that deep down depression that started to rise was when I came to a point where, here I have to mention that although I have not sought permission for this specific talk with my mother because I was going to be spontaneous, in the past my mother has given me the freedom to use her as our relationships as an example of the struggles that I go through. She said, that's fine, if it helps others to understand something, you can use my name, that's fine. Basically, my biological mother happens to be the biological person, but it is a metaphor. When I say mother, it can include anyone in our relationships. So, but for me, the thing which triggered that deep depression was when the last big conflict I had with my mom when she visited Australia, then that triggered something within me where I suddenly felt hopeless. I felt like if I can't even try to please and help my own mother of this life, this whole idea of helping all sentient beings, this grand concept of helping all sentient beings is completely hypocritical thinking. It's completely out of the window. So then I realized that this whole idea of helping my mother was completely an illusion. It was like a denial on my part. I believed that she was the one maybe needed help when I discovered, looked into myself through my practices, that it was really me who needed that help. I was struggling with issues such as anger, resentment, and so, of course, when I give a normal talk and just use it as my mother as a casual example, I would say, yes, my mother pushes my buttons, and that's why I get angry. So of course my mother is to blame because she pushes my buttons, right? For many years I did believe that actually my mother was intentional, not intentional, who knows, but the fact is that I felt that, okay, she's pushing my buttons and that's why I'm getting angry. Otherwise I wouldn't have any problem. Was that true? No. It could be been anyone. When I start, anyone who tries to get close to me and I become vulnerable of exposing what's happening within myself, it triggers something where I start becoming angry and resentful. And so here I started to realize that although initially I might have blamed my mother for pushing my buttons, or for anyone else for that matter who pushes my buttons, it could be anyone on the street, it could be a stranger, but if I didn't have those buttons, how could anyone push them? Am I going to blame my mother or my father for my buttons? And here we're using the metaphor of buttons, but what it means is those emotional buttons. That sense of anger, resentment, or inadequacy, unhappiness. I can't, my parents have helped me to bring me in this world on a physical level, but all of that, as I've learned through the Buddhist teachings, the emotions that I can't blame anyone, my mother, father, or anyone else, for the emotions that I have within myself. That is something completely coming from my own side. I have to take ownership of that, because in the Buddhist world, Buddhist teachings, emotions is related to the mind. And that is the theme here, about working on one's mind. And so therefore, although I went, of course, when I had all the symptoms of depression, I sought help. I felt this thing that trying to help my mom was something beyond, it was unrealistic. I needed help myself. So I went to see my doctor, I explained the symptoms I was having, sleepless nights, anxiety attacks, and all of that. And so I was given two options, medication and therapy. Medication, I just felt like maybe I'll wait on that. Let me try therapy first. So I did go to therapy. And again, here I was stepping possibly a little bit out of the boundaries of the Eastern tradition. There you have your uncles and aunts and the teachers, the gurus that you go and seek help from, not therapists. But nevertheless, I took advantage of my Western side. I thought, okay, I will accept and I'll go to therapy. So I did 1.5 years of therapy, and then I did the spiritual side of doing extensive retreats. And so I, after nearly 5 years of supposedly working on myself, I thought I was ready now maybe to come and, if not help my mother, at least, try to have a nice, peaceful coexistence with my mother again. So, of course, I decided to come here, even though it was not really encouraged from my mother's own side. I said, no, I think it's going to be okay, I'm ready. So this comes to the more recent emotional turmoils, where even after 5 years, and even after when I thought I've done work on myself, therapy, practices, retreats, same old stuff comes up. So the triggers are like really, really deep, really deep. So no wonder the teachings say that it takes lifetime, even lifetimes, according to Buddhist teachings. Some of these triggers are so deep-rooted, so deep-rooted that it can take lifetimes to really overcome them. And with specifically like karmic things which are issues with in relation to people and so forth, definitely like that. So there's so much more I'd like to share, but we are limited with the time. But what I want to do here is introduce you to and present the center with some books, which is I think it will be very helpful for people to have access to these books. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it was my tendency, a natural human tendency to blame. I think it's a natural human tendency to blame anyone else for one's problems. It's very convenient when you can blame someone else. And so, of course, in the Buddhist teachings, they talk about that all our problems comes from actually the deep main root of all our problems is ignorance. And out of ignorance comes attachment, and anger. Now these are again broad phrases, which they're summarized as the 3 poisons. So all the root of all our problems is the 3 poisons, which is attachment. Again, the word attachment can have misleading and misguiding. It is a word which actually doesn't do justice to the original word. In Tibetan, it's dochar. It has a connotation of all the vices from greediness to impulsive behavior, like substance abuses, and how should we say, greediness, lust, and all of those are under that word of attachment. In a negative sense, it has a negative connotation, where the mind gets distorted and you act out of distortion. Then anger. Anger again is one word, and again we might have this image of this full-blown anger of why I'm not. You could say like, oh, I'm not angry when you're not like showing the externally. But the anger word here from Buddhist context includes all from the very subtle levels of annoyance, being upset and agitated, leading up to then more full-blown anger, where it can come out physically or verbally, and then to actually hatred, resentment and hatred and all of that. So it is said that these anger and attachment both stem from ignorance, and simply because one does not know any better. One does not, and the ignorance here is really relating to one's personal identity, not really knowing the self, having an illusional idea of what the self is. Now, I have so much to say that somehow it's all kind of like coming, so excuse me if I'm going back and forth a bit, but I'm trying to synthesize in a few minutes the main sort of thing that I wanted to share, which is that the convenience of blaming others is when we don't take responsibility. We think like nothing's wrong with me. And so, that's what I was going to say, that from these 3, what we call poisons, it says that it taints our worldview, and we make categories in the world. And with people, usually with this, out of these 3 poisons, we make the category of friends, enemies, and strangers. So we relate to the outside others as being either friends, enemies, or strangers. And thus with friends, you have attachment. With enemies, you have anger. And with strangers is indifference. Now, although these categories are not fixed as they're described in Buddhism, because friends can also be enemies, turn into enemies, enemies can turn into friends as well, and in the category of friends actually includes all the loved and dear ones. So it could be all your family members, your mother, father, brothers, whoever, dear ones. But then we all know that they can be also put in the category of enemies as well. Now, because of these seemingly fixed categories, which sometimes can have wrong connotations, I was thrilled to hear about this 4th category, which is not too long ago I heard about. I don't know if you've come across this phrase. It's not become an English phrase, well, not English actually, maybe technically in the dictionary, but some people have used it, and I thought, wow, wonderful, that's true. Frenemies. Have you heard of frenemies?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, frenemies is like your friends, but then they really drive you up the wall sometimes. You get really aggravated. So this is where I'm going to introduce the book. This book by David Ford that I've read, I think twice already, The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. So the dark side of the light chasers, who are the light chasers? The light chasers are the ones who are spiritually inclined, who want to honestly find real meaning and purpose in life on a spiritual level. However, there's a dark side to it. Dark side to every spiritual seeker. There's also a dark side. Now, we don't acknowledge that, we don't embrace that. That's where we then think that, we're better than others. So this frenemies comes according to this book, which has a very good description, and I'm going to present this to the Institute's center here so that you can share and you can borrow. You might even want to order your own copy. But basically, the gist of this is that when others are friends, we're seeing our qualities. They are projecting our qualities that we appreciate, that we resonate with, and makes us feel comfortable because it's actually a projection of our own qualities. Whereas enemies or disagreeable people are, what's happening is they're reflecting our own insecurities, our own vulnerabilities. And that's something we don't want to, we don't want to expose our vulnerabilities. We don't want to see And that is what is called denial. But so therefore it's projected upon others. So here it goes into the ranges of all sort of things that we could project upon others. You know, from downright someone's hateful or racist and all of that. If you have a negative attitude towards others about their either their ideologies or their religion or whatever it may be, it means there's something that you haven't really worked on within yourself. So I'll leave this book with you to get more information about that, which I think would be very helpful. And then there's a second book, which is a book of joy. So although I've not had the time, been able to really share much from the Buddhist teachings on to finding how to find happiness and joy, but this book of joy by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, who recently passed away, again, is a wonderful book. And there's even a movie, documentary about their meeting at that time, which has been just released. So if you're on the lookout, you might be able to get access to that as well. But as a book, I've just nearly finished reading it myself, but it was presented to me by a local here in Yucca Valley, Qigong Master Walter. Some of you may know him. So he presented it to me and said, share it with others. So even before I finished it, I'm sharing it with you. I'll leave it for you for all to go through. So, but it would not do justice to finish off before saying that really my vulnerabilities, to be really downright honest, was that what was really appalling and shocking to myself was to see that there is that sense of rage within myself and anger which can come out so strongly that, according to the Buddhist teachings, in this book, when Desmond Tutu was talking about his father showing cruelty to his mother and being very, very regretful that he was not able to hear his father's maybe confession just before he died. His father had said something to him when he was young, saying that I have something to tell you. But then Desmond Tutu said he was quite tired then, whatever. He said, oh, maybe tomorrow. And he brushed up, whatever. And the next morning, his father had already passed away. And so he says that he holds that regret of not listening to perhaps what his father was about to do, was to forgive, seek for forgiveness. And so Desmond Tutu, while he was explaining that, was like becoming a little bit emotional and sad. And the Dalai Lama was consoling him, saying that, oh, so according to your description, your father was only nasty to your mother when he was drunk, but otherwise a very kind, nice person. So actually, in essence, your father was maybe a kind person, but he was just being influenced by alcohol. Now, this is a great metaphor in the Buddhist teachings, is how when we have these strong emotions based on confusion, based on ignorance, anger, and attachments, it actually says that it distorts our mind. Is actually we become like intoxicated. So in the Buddhist teachings, that's for as a monk, we are not permitted to have alcohol because we are already intoxicated with ignorance. So if you drink if you use substances which will further dilute your mind, there's no way to judge what you could do. Yeah? But for me, I was telling my mom recently that even without intoxicants, I feel like I become intoxicated at times. When there's deep anger and so forth, I say things which otherwise I would have not meant. I do things, that I otherwise would have not meant to do, but I become completely out of control. Yeah? And that is what happens. This intoxications of these negative emotions makes you become another person. And so, thus in the Buddhist teachings, one of my late master's teachers, he said that there's a famous book which has come out from his teachings, which is titled Become Your Own Therapist. So ultimately, yes, we need help, but a real true therapist would help you to manage yourself. A great teacher, a real authentic teacher, would guide you to find your own teacher within yourself, your own guru within yourself. And this is what it is, as mentioned earlier, reading earlier, the Buddha within means we all have the potential to if we are honest with ourselves, if we're willing to be vulnerable. So if you read this book, it means that you're willing to be vulnerable to yourself, to see that what you see in others, in criticizing others, is actually coming all from your own mind, from yourself. There's unresolved issues within yourself. And so this is why But, you know, compassion and love is something I would agree with. Of course I would agree with. That's why I'm still on the spiritual path. But do I show love and compassion with one person in my life that I claim to love or have feelings for, my own mother? We're not intoxicated with these emotions of anger and rage and so forth. All of that goes out of the window. So basically, I also like to say this because I would like to make a public apology here to my mom, not only to my mom, but anyone else who might have had the impression where I was saying, I might actually come over here and maybe start helping my mom a bit and do some spiritual work around, giving teachings. This was really coming from my own disillusioned mind, thinking that I have maybe been able, that I've been cured, now that I can actually present and be a teacher to others, and I helped my mom, when in fact the reality, as my mom very kindly is a catalyst for me to see, is that I'm way beyond ready right now. And if you see, and that's why in our tradition, they say that there's a whole lot of qualities you need to seek in a teacher before you accept them as your teacher. Many qualities. You have to check their background, their lineage, are they from a authentic tradition? So if I were to come out here by myself and claim that, yes, I can do spiritual work, teach without my teacher's permission, there's a danger, a great danger of becoming a self-proclaimed teacher. I say proclaimed teacher, and this is where the danger of many people have been misled of what we call cult leaders, cult teachers, right? Some of these cult teachers, as we know, are way wacky. But the dangerous ones are the intelligent ones, those who actually have learned, have knowledge. And that's where the danger comes. If you haven't seen on Netflix Wild Wild Country, I recommend you see it. Yeah? And there's many others examples we can use of these cult leaders who come out as if like they are, they have charisma, they're well-spoken, like maybe, I don't know, if I've made any sense so far, I might have been quite well-spoken too now, but there's charisma as well, and ability to manipulate. And so in the Buddhist teachings it says, when we have to be careful that the teachings don't become poison. They say that the analogy is that when medicine, what is supposed to cure us, actually becomes poison, then there's not much hope for us. So the teachings that our teachers say that when you use the teachings for self-gratification, self-proclamation, and then it becomes a poison. The teachings actually, you're polluting the teachings, in which we are not only deceiving yourself, you're deceiving others, misleading others. So therefore in my tradition, we have a very strong sense of following the teacher's guides. If you do anything out of that line, then you're setting yourself for danger. So I think with that, I would have to conclude because I've gone way over time, and I can see that you've been very patient and willing to accept what I'm sharing. But I think, do we have time for a short meditation?
Yes.
Okay. So we will end with a short meditation, and I think with that, I'll do a chant because I'm known to have a bit of a nice voice. But basically, it's a chant which is an invocation again from our tradition, and so the words basically is inviting the enlightened beings, the spiritual beings, to be present with us as a way to help us, guide us in healing for ourselves and healing for others, healing for the whole world, humanity, which we so need at this time. So we're inviting the spiritual beings, and for whatever tradition you may belong to, or even if you don't belong to a spiritual tradition or what we call a religious tradition, if you believe in love and compassion and wisdom, those are the spiritual beings. So inviting them and trying to tune in with them and seeking love and compassion for ourselves and love and compassion for others, and wisdom, which is so important. So I'll just do the chant and pause after the chant so that we can all go in a few minutes meditation. Thank you very much, everyone. You can get this on eBay for about $11 or $10. So, just, although I'm leaving this copy with you, if you want to get a personal copy, you can find it.
Thank you so much.